A tiny baby crawled toward a huge dog that was 10 times bigger than him. His parents froze in terror, unable to move. The enormous Saint Bernard lowered his head, and what happened next left everyone speechless. Before you watch, remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss another touching story like this one. And write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Duke, stay. Margaret called sharply as her son Benjamin began crawling across the living room floor. The massive Saint Bernard stood like a statue in the center of the room. His name was Duke, and when he was sitting, he looked like a small mountain. His head almost reached the side of the tan sofa, and his paws were bigger than a dinner plate. In front of him on the rug sat Benny, not even 1 year old yet, dressed in a soft white outfit covering him completely. His little legs were positioned awkwardly, like his tiny body was still learning to balance properly, but his eyes, wide, curious, and steady, remained fixed on the giant animal in front of him. "Don't let him get close," Margaret said urgently in a whisper from the sofa, her fingers gripping the edge of a cushion tightly, tension making her shoulders rigid. Across the room, her husband Robert knelt down on one knee, observing carefully. "Maggie, everything's fine. Duke knows what he's doing. Look, he's not moving." "That's precisely what frightens me," Margaret answered quickly, her voice low but strong. "We can't predict what he'll do. One sudden movement, one error," she stopped talking, her eyes staying focused on her child sitting there with the dog, who weighed 10 times more than him. Benny's tiny hand, shaky and small, stretched out. His chubby fingers spread open and closed like he was attempting to feel the soft, thick fur. His mouth started making soft noises, then they grew louder. "Duh." Margaret began to get up. "Bob, I swear, if he moves closer." "Shoo." Robert held up his hand to stop her. His face showed concern too, but there was something more peaceful in his expression. He'd grown up with dogs all his life, and Duke had never shown aggression. Still, his heart began beating faster when Benny moved forward and placed his hand directly on Duke's chest. Duke's droopy, soulful eyes tracked every movement. That look, the sad, gentle expression street Bernards were famous for, seemed to soften even more as he watched the baby. The large dog inhaled sharply, his ears shifted, and his head lowered a bit. The sound of his breath filled the quiet room. "Oh, Bob." Margaret's voice cracked. Duke didn't snap at him. He didn't growl. But the total silence, with time seeming to stretch forever, made it nearly unbearable. "Maybe we should," Margaret started, her voice rising with panic. "Wait," Robert said, his own voice tight now. "Just wait." But every muscle in Margaret's body was screaming at her to move, to grab Benny, to end this before something terrible happened. Benny, wobbling slightly, made a pleased sound. His face lit up with pure joy, completely unaware of his parents' terror. Then, shocking both parents completely, he opened his arms wide and leaned forward clumsily, attempting to wrap them around the dog's thick neck. His whole body tipped with the effort. Margaret gasped sharply and started moving, but Robert grabbed her arm. "Wait, just watch. Bob, he's going to." "Watch," Robert repeated, his grip firm but his voice shaking. Benny couldn't reach very far. His body tilted sideways, his head about to strike the hard floor, when Duke reacted. One enormous paw, covered with dense fur between the toes, came forward with surprising gentleness. It positioned itself right beside Benny's back, keeping him balanced like a brace. The movement was pure Saint Bernard, protective, deliberate, the same instinct that made his ancestors dig people out of snow. Margaret froze in place, her mouth falling open in disbelief. He caught him from falling. Benny giggled, slapping his little hands on Duke's paw as if it were a toy. He babbled meaningless sounds, then pressed his face into the soft coat. His entire body went limp as though he'd found the most comfortable spot to relax. "Did you see that?" Robert whispered, his voice full of wonder. He knew. He knew Benny was about to fall. Margaret's hands were still shaking. She couldn't take her eyes off Duke's massive paw, still positioned protectively beside her son. Duke closed his eyes slowly, his head lowering further, his nose hovering just inches from the baby's tiny face, his breathing gently moving Benny's fine hair. Robert spoke softly, barely audible. He's choosing to protect him. It's natural for him. Saint Bernards are meant to guard people. But Margaret wasn't convinced yet. She remained nearby, her hand trembling. Bob, he's still an animal. We can't know what he's thinking. Just watch him, Robert responded. If he meant any harm, he's had many chances already. Benny touched Duke's nose awkwardly, then grabbed the long strands of fur. Margaret's heart skipped with worry, but Duke simply exhaled through his nostrils, his eyes half closing like he was tolerating the rough handling. See? Robert said quietly. He's being patient with him. Margaret wanted to believe it, wanted to trust, but her fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest. Then the instant arrived that made time seem to stop. Benny leaned back, his eyes shining, and spoke one word, hug. His arms opened wide again, reaching for Duke's large head. Margaret stopped breathing, her hands jumping to her chest. Bob, make him stop, please. But Robert was paralyzed. His heart was racing so violently he could feel it pounding in his head. Benny pushed forward, his arms still stretched out, waiting. His little face was full of trust, full of love. Duke's whole body became stiff. Every part of him tensed, his eyes fixed on the infant with such force that it made Margaret's body go ice cold. For 3 seconds, perhaps 4, nothing moved. The room seemed like it was afraid to breathe. Margaret's sight became blurry with frightened tears. Bob, she said barely above a whisper, her voice unsteady, do something now. Robert's hand shook as he began reaching out, but then Duke began moving in slow motion, so gradually it didn't seem possible. His rescue instinct, bred into generations of Saint Bernards who had saved people in the mountains, was kicking in now, but gentler, more careful than ever before. His huge head started coming down bit by bit. Margaret's hands went over her mouth, holding back a cry. The dog's mouth was so dangerously close to Benny's face. One careless move, one animal reaction, that's all it would need. Benny's small fingers reached up toward the massive head coming down to him. His smile never wavered. Complete trust. Please, Margaret whispered desperately, tears running down her cheeks. Please, Duke, please. Robert couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch. Duke's eyes stayed locked on the baby. His body kept sinking down, down. His stomach met the floor, then his chest. He flattened himself, becoming as compact as something so large could possibly become, until at last his enormous head settled softly, precisely inside the space created by Benny's little open arms. For one still moment, no one took a breath. Then Benny made a joyful shriek, a clear sound of happiness that broke the silence like shattering glass. He pushed his face into the fur, his tiny hands vanishing in the deep, soft coat, laughing without control. Margaret fell backward, her hand pressed against her heart, gulping air she hadn't realized she was holding. Robert's knees almost buckled under him. Did you see what happened? He said quietly, his voice unsteady. Did you see what he just did? Margaret had no words. She could only move her head, tears streaming down her face, not frightened tears this time, but tears of something completely different, something deeper. He understood, she finally managed to say. He knew what Benny wanted and he made himself small for him. He picked him, Robert said, emotion making his voice thick. He truly decided to guard him. Margaret wiped her face with shaking hands. For the first time in several minutes, she could breathe normally again. Benny moved suddenly, his little body rocking. He attempted to climb up higher, his hands becoming more caught in Duke's thick, fluffy fur. For a moment, it looked dangerous. Benny's fingers pulled hard, his weight shifting. Margaret started to rise again, ready to intervene, but Duke adjusted first. Carefully, the dog lifted his paw and brought it forward, placing it securely over Benny's legs. The movement looked intentional, considered. It was as though he was keeping the child in position just enough to stabilize him. Benny made cheerful noises and patted the massive paw with his small hand. "Big, big," he said in his baby talk. Robert chuckled softly. "He's right. Bigger than he'll ever understand." Margaret pressed her palms together. "I was prepared to snatch him up. I was certain this would go wrong." "And now?" Robert asked. Margaret watched as Duke shifted into a lying position, lowering himself until Benny was resting against his side. His thick fur became like a blanket around the baby. "Now I see it," she said softly. "He's Benny's guardian." Benny yawned suddenly, his face buried into the soft fur. In moments, his breathing slowed into sleep. Duke remained motionless, but his eyes opened wider, alert, his ears twitched, listening. Margaret crouched down beside them. Duke's eyes moved from Benny to the windows, to the doorway, then back. Watchful. "You're standing guard," she whispered. Robert wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "He won't let anything happen to him." From that day forward, nobody in that house ever doubted who was watching over their child. Did this story touch you? If you were Margaret in that precise moment, seeing your baby reach out to hold that giant dog, would you have believed in the dog and allowed it? Yes or no? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel and click like. Thank you so much for watching.